It began as a whisper across global defense networks. Satellites picked up anomalous readings in deep space, massive objects moving toward Earth at impossible speeds. Within hours, astronomers confirmed the worst. An alien fleet was approaching. The invasion began at dawn. Across the world, millions of people woke up to the sight of monstrous warships piercing the sky. They moved with deliberate, terrifying grace, their hulls gleaming under the sun like celestial titans. These were not mere scouting vessels. They were Zorvak's Dominion battlecruisers, each the size of a city, bristling with weapons beyond human comprehension. Their sleek black surfaces bore the unmistakable insignia of the Galactic Empire, a mark feared across the cosmos. On board the flagship, Zenthos Prime, High Commander Zyrax observed Earth with mild amusement. The reptilian overlord, draped in shimmering imperial robes, leaned forward in his throne-like chair. His yellow, slit-pupiled eyes studied the blue-green planet below as though it were a piece of fruit waiting to be crushed in his claws. "Pathetic," he muttered, tapping his metallic fingers against the armrest. "These creatures still rely on combustion engines and ballistic projectiles. How quaint." His officers, a mix of tall, insectoid strategists and hulking, armored enforcers, let out guttural laughs. "Shall we issue demands?" one of them asked. His voice had distorted his through his breathing apparatus. Zyrax smirked. "No need. History has shown that when we land, they will either kneel or die. Let's begin." Without warning, the first wave of Zorvak's forces descended upon Earth. The invasion begins. The world watched in horror as the Zorvak's war machine came to life. Plasma beams erupted from the sky, reducing entire military installations to smoldering craters. Towers of energy split apart battleships, and entire cities were locked in electromagnetic pulses, rendering human technology useless. Then, the Zorvak's infantry landed. They were 9 feet tall, clad in obsidian black armor, their glowing plasma rifles humming with unholy energy. Their movements were precise and mechanical, the result of genetic modifications and cybernetic enhancements that made them vastly superior to any human soldier. The first line of human defense was the United Nations coalition forces, a hurriedly assembled alliance of NATO, Russian, and Chinese forces. They had seen combat against each other, but now they faced an enemy unlike anything Earth had encountered. In Paris, the French Foreign Legion set up barricades along the Seine, only to be incinerated within minutes. In Moscow, an entire armored division was overrun by Zorvak's war beasts, massive cybernetic creatures that tore through tanks as if they were made of paper. In Karachi, fighter jets scrambled from a Pakistan Air Force base Masroor, only to be shot down in midair by energy lances before they could even engage the enemy. All over the world, humanity fought back, but failed. Bullets bounced off Zorvak's armor. Missiles were intercepted by energy shields. Tanks were reduced to molten husks before they could fire a single shell. The world's most powerful armies collapsed under the sheer technological superiority of the invaders. By the end of the first 24 hours, 15 major cities had fallen. The Zorvak's mocked humanity's weakness, broadcasting live footage of soldiers running in terror as their weapons failed to penetrate alien defenses. The last hope, General Samuel Briggs. In the Pentagon's underground war room, General Samuel Briggs watched the carnage unfold across a holographic map. A veteran of countless battles, he was not a man prone to fear, but even he knew the odds were dire. Briggs was in his late 50s, his face marked by years of warfare, his uniform adorned with combat ribbons from past conflicts. But none of those battles had prepared him for this. "These bastards aren't just attacking," said Colonel Harris, his second-in-command. "They're playing with us. They could wipe us out in minutes, but they're taking their time." Briggs exhaled through his nose, his fists clenched. "Because they don't see us as a real threat. They think we're just another primitive race to subjugate." A young officer ran into the room, breathless. "Sir, Washington, D.C. is their next target. A fleet is moving toward the East Coast. We have 6 hours before they're on top of us." Briggs closed his eyes for a moment, thinking. The standard countermeasures wouldn't work. Aircraft were useless against their interceptors. Infantry would be slaughtered. Then, he turned to a screen displaying the last intact division of America's armored forces. A long row of M1 Abrams tanks, their barrels gleaming under floodlights, stood ready in a classified underground base. Briggs's expression hardened. "They've never faced real armor before," he muttered. Harris frowned. "Sir, the Abrams is outdated compared to their war machines. It's still a ballistic-based tank. It won't even scratch them." Briggs smirked. "That's what they think." He turned to the room. "Give me every M1 Abrams, every A-10 Warthog, and every artillery battery we have left. We're not fighting on their terms anymore." His eyes gleamed with a fire that had long been missing from a war room. "We're going old school. The Zorvak's arrogance." On the Zorvak's command bridge, High Commander Zyrax sat back in his chair, watching the invasion unfold with amusement. "Any resistance in Washington?" he asked lazily. A Zorvak's officer responded. "Minimal. They are mobilizing tanks." Zyrax chuckled. "Tanks? They bring metal boxes with wheels against the Zorvak's dominion? How adorable!" His officers joined in his laughter. Another commander sneered. "Should we deploy more walkers to crush them?" Zyrax waved a hand dismissively. "No need. This planet is already ours. Let them have their little machines. It will make their inevitable defeat more entertaining." The bridge erupted in laughter once more. They did not know it yet. The East Coast was in chaos. Civilians flooded highways, desperate to flee as Zorvak's warships hovered over the Atlantic, their massive shadows blotting out the sun. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., a last-stand battle formation was being assembled. Inside a hastily set-up command center, General Samuel Briggs stood over a holographic battle map. His face was set in grim determination as he observed the incoming alien forces. His second-in-command, Colonel Harris, paced anxiously. "Sir, the Zorvak's outnumber us 10-1. Their infantry is practically invincible. Their walkers are the size of buildings and their plasma cannons." Briggs cut him off. "Can melt through steel like butter." "I know, Colonel." He exhaled. "But we're not fighting a war technology. We're fighting a war tactics. And that's where they'll fail." Harris frowned. "You really believe tanks can take them on?" Briggs smirked. "The M1 Abrams isn't just a tank. It's a battle-proven war machine. And these aliens..." His smirk widened. "They've never fought something like it before. The ambush is set. By dawn, the American forces were in position. The M1A2 Abrams tanks, America's premier main battle tanks, lined the streets and countryside. Their 120 millimeters smoothbore cannons gleamed under the morning light. Crews stood ready, hands sweating on controls, knowing they were up against an enemy that had never been defeated before. Alongside them, artillery divisions positioned their M777 howitzers, loaded with high-explosive shells. A-10 Warthogs, infamous for their GAU, 8 Avenger cannons, waited in hidden airstrips. "Let them come," Briggs muttered, gripping his radio. At precisely 0800 hours, the Zorvak's advanced. The arrogance of the invaders. Marching down the ruined highways, Zorvak's infantry legions moved in perfect synchrony, their plasma rifles humming. Behind them, towering Walker dreadnoughts, three-legged war machines bristling with energy cannons, stomped to the landscape, each step shaking the ground. At the center of the formation stood Overseer Grack, the Zorvak's general tasked with capturing Washington. He was a hulking figure, clad in shimmering black armor, his red eyes scanning the battlefield with supreme confidence. His communication officer, a wiry insectoid creature, sneered as he analyzed the human defenses. "They have positioned tanks and cannons, my lord," he reported. Grack laughed. "Metal coffins on wheels? How amusing." He turned to his troops. "March forward. Let them fire first. I want to see how powerful their weapons really are." The Zorvak's obeyed, their armored bodies glowing with energy shields, confident that no human weapon could pierce their defenses. They were wrong. The first shots fired. At 1,000 yards, General Briggs gave the order to fire. A deafening boom shattered the morning air as the first M1 Abrams unleashed a tungsten armor-piercing shell. The shell ripped through the lead Zorvak's walker's knee joint like a hot knife through butter. The towering machine wobbled as metal groaned, and then with a massive crash, it collapsed onto the alien ranks below. Before the Zorvax could react, another barrage followed. Shells tore through enemy ranks, shredding through infantry armor that had never been designed to withstand kinetic projectiles. The Zorvax had underestimated the sheer force of Earth's ballistic weaponry. Their energy shields, optimized for deflecting plasma blasts, were useless against high-velocity tungsten rounds. Panic rippled through their ranks. Their supposedly primitive enemy had just crippled their advance within seconds. The battle intensifies. Overseer Grack roared in rage. "Fools! Return fire!" Zorvax plasma cannons lit up the battlefield, raining down energy blasts on human positions. Buildings exploded. Highways were reduced to molten slag, and infantry troops were vaporized instantly. But the M1 Abrams tanks held their ground. Unlike the Zorvax, they were built for real war. Their advanced composite armor absorbed and dispersed heat, allowing many to withstand multiple direct hits before going down. And the surviving tanks? They kept firing. Hey! 10 Warthogs swooped in, their 30mm cannons ripping through exposed Zorvax weak points. Artillery teams launched barrage after barrage, reducing once invincible alien formations into burning wreckage. The Zorvax broke ranks for the first time in their history. The turning point. Grack's command vehicle, a towering hovering command dreadnought, became a primary target. "Concentrate all fire on that bastard's walker," Briggs ordered. A squadron of M1 Abrams tanks, led by Captain Ryan Carter, advanced straight into the heart of the enemy line. Ducking plasma blasts, the tanks fired in perfect coordination. One shell to disable the walker's shield generator, one shell to penetrate its armor, one final shell directly into its power core. The explosion was enormous. Overseer Grack's flagship walker erupted into flames, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The Zorvax retreat. The Zorvax, once so confident, now scrambled in desperation. Their walker dreadnoughts lay in smoking ruins. Their infantry forces had been cut down like wheat before the scythe. High above in orbit, High Commander Zyrax watched in horror as his unstoppable forces were reduced to scattered, fleeing remnants. "This is impossible," he whispered. For the first time in centuries, the Zorvax Dominion had suffered a true defeat. The invasion force retreated, their warships lifting off as quickly as they had arrived. Washington, D.C. had been saved. Victory amidst the ashes. As the dust settled, General Briggs stood atop a ruined overpass, looking down at the battlefield. The wreckage of Zorvax war machines littered the ground, their corpses a testament to human resilience. Colonel Harris walked up beside him. "We did it, sir." Briggs exhaled. "Yeah, we did." He pulled out a cigar, lighting it with shaking hand. "Guess we're not so primitive after all." The sun rose over Washington, D.C., casting its golden light over a battlefield littered with smoking Zorvax wreckage. The once mighty alien war machines lay broken, their advanced technology useless against the sheer brutality of Earth's firepower. General Samuel Briggs stood atop a ruined overpass, surveying the chaos left behind. His cigar burned slowly between his fingers, the taste of victory bitter in his mouth. Human soldiers walked between the wreckage, their eyes filled with equal parts relief and horror. The battle had been won, but at a terrible cost. Thousands of civilians had perished in the initial assault. Entire city blocks had been reduced to rubble. The White House was a charred ruin. The Capitol building had collapsed into itself, and what remained of Washington was barely standing. Colonel Harris approached, his face still streaked with soot and blood. He had been in the thick of the fighting, commanding the artillery teams that had rained hell on the Zorvax forces. "Sir," Harris said, his voice rough with exhaustion, "we're getting reports from around the world. The Zorvax are retreating." Briggs nodded. "I know." He took a long drag from his cigar. "They finally realized they picked a fight with the wrong species." Harris handed him a radio transmission intercepted from the Zorvax command network. The alien voice crackled through the speakers, filled with panic. "High Command, we have suffered catastrophic losses. Human weapons are primitive, yet devastating. Their ballistic projectiles pierce our shields. Their artillery shreds our forces. Retreat is the only option. Briggs chuckled. Imagine that. The greatest empire in the galaxy, running scared from old-school firepower. Zyrax's wrath. High above the battlefield, Zorvak's warships fled into the upper atmosphere, their once invincible armada now reduced to mere remnants. Aboard the Zenthos Prime, High Commander Zyrax sat in seething silence. His yellow, reptilian eyes burned with fury, his sharp claws digging into the armrests of his throne. His fleet had never suffered a defeat before today. For centuries, the Zorvak's dominion had crushed civilizations, enslaved species, and rewritten the fate of entire worlds. They had never lost a war. Until now, until Earth, a holographic projection flickered before him. His generals, their faces pale with shame. "My lord," one of them began, his mandibles clicking nervously. "The humans, they were not what we expected." Zyrax's lips curled into a snarl. "You think I did not see that?" Another general hesitated before speaking. "Our plasma weaponry proved ineffective against their primitive kinetic shells. Their armor absorbed our energy blasts. Their artillery struck with devastating precision." Zyrax rose from his throne, his golden cape swirling behind him. "You mean to tell me that a race using gunpowder and steel has humbled the Zorvak's dominion?" None of the generals answered. The silence was answer enough. Zyrax exhaled sharply. "The Emperor will not tolerate this failure." His claws scraped against the metal floor, the sound echoing through the chamber. One of the generals spoke carefully. "Shall we prepare a second invasion force?" Zyrax considered it. The humans had shown resilience, but they were still far behind the Zorvaks in technology. A proper assault, with planetary bombardment and orbital strikes, could still wipe them out. But then, something strange happened. His communication officers began receiving transmissions from across the Empire. News of their defeat had already spread. On distant planets, species once subjugated by the Zorvaks began rising up. Rebellions erupted across dozens of worlds. The illusion of Zorvak's invincibility had been shattered, and all because of Earth. Zyrax's fist clenched. If they launched another attack, they would weaken their forces elsewhere. The Empire could collapse. For the first time in his life, Zyrax made a decision he had never made before. He would retreat. Briggs sends a message. Back on Earth, celebrations erupted across surviving cities as news of the Zorvak's retreat spread. General Briggs, however, was not celebrating. He stood in front of a makeshift camera, broadcasting a message directly to the retreating fleet. "High Commander Zyrax," Briggs said, his voice calm yet unyielding. "I know you can hear this." He took a step forward, looking directly into the camera. "You came here thinking we were weak, that we were just another primitive race waiting to be conquered." Briggs gestured toward the wreckage of Zorvak's war machines behind him. "But as you've learned, Earth is not so easily beaten." His voice hardened. "You underestimated us. You thought our weapons were outdated relics. But you forgot something. Wars aren't won by technology. They're won by the soldiers who fight them." He leaned closer. "You lost the day because we don't kneel. We don't surrender. And if you ever come back, we'll bury you." He flicked the cigar away, letting it fall onto the broken hull of a destroyed Zorvak's walker. The broadcast ended. The Empire's shame. Aboard the Zenthos Prime, Zyrax watched the broadcast in silence. His general stood frozen, waiting for his reaction. Slowly, Zyrax turned away from the screen. "Set a course for the homeworld," he growled. "Tell the Emperor the invasion has failed." The warship trembled as it jumped into hyperspace, leaving Earth forever behind. Earth's legacy. In the weeks that followed, humanity rebuilt. The Battle of Washington became legend, a story told for generations. The M1 Abrams, once considered outdated by modern military standards, became a symbol of defiance. The world, once divided by war, now stood united by survival. And across the galaxy, the legend of Earth spread. A species that had defied an empire. A species that had turned the tide of history. And most importantly, a species that would never, ever kneel